Crested geckos are one of the most popular pet reptiles and even more popular first pet reptile, and for good reason. Crested geckos are charismatic and fun, and their convenient size and ease of care makes them a great candidate for a first pet reptile for anyone starting out. Getting your first crested gecko is exciting, but it can also be intimidating. Here are 3 crested gecko mistakes new keepers make and how you can fix them or prevent them. First, helicopter parenting. One thing I commonly see amongst new keepers is something that I was guilty of when I first started too, and that's being too worried or anxious with my animals. Being attentive and mindful of your animal and keeping track of how it's doing is essential, but new keepers are often overwhelmed by all of the what ifs. What if my crested gecko isn't eating? What if my gecko isn't drinking? And why is my gecko not growing? Are often questions I get asked when I sell geckos to new keepers. And far more often than not, the gecko is perfectly fine. However, helicoptering over your animal and worrying about problems that may not even exist is the #1 way of creating problems. Allowing your gecko to settle, to eat on its own, and to simply grow at its own pace is the best thing you can do as a new keeper. Getting a new pet can often be overwhelming, but as long as you get your gecko from a reputable source and you've done your research, your gecko should thrive. Trusting yourself will make a world of difference. The second mistake is inadequate misting and inappropriate misting. Though this has changed in the last several years, one piece of advice new keepers often receive is to mist once a day or twice a day. This leads to a significant mistake, which is over or under misting. Firstly, depending on where you live, your humidity may vary greatly. When misting too often in a higher humidity environment, there won't be an adequate dry period during which your gecko's enclosure is allowed to dry out. The issue arises when bacteria and mold starts to accumulate, contributing to an unsterile environment and air quality. Too much humidity for extended periods of time can cause respiratory infections and even fungal infections on the skin of the animal. On the flip side, if you live in a particularly dry environment, misting just once or twice daily may not be enough either. Smaller misting sessions throughout the day accompanied by heavy misting at night may be a good idea to implement. If your enclosure is dry too often, your animal may develop various issues like failure to shed properly and dehydration. Although crested geckos will occasionally drink from a water bowl if they happen to stumble upon it, 9 times out of 10, these geckos will lick water drops off of plants, the enclosure walls, and other decor in their enclosure. An overly dry enclosure won't give your gecko enough opportunity to hydrate, especially at nights when they are more active. One way to go about this is by covering up some of your mesh or screen on the top of your enclosure if you have a glass front opening terrarium, or ventilation holes in your tubs if you keep plastic tubs. This will reduce how fast water evaporates, but make sure not to eliminate all of the ventilation, as ventilation and airflow is crucial to maintain a clean environment and air quality. All in all, it's important to be attentive to your gecko and its husbandry, and advice from others is important, but being attentive and making appropriate changes that best accommodate your needs and environment is of utmost importance too. Another mistake I see very commonly is that people mix their food improperly. This is a weirdly specific detail, but allow me to explain. The commercially available diets for crested geckos are meant to stimulate the fruit they would naturally and primarily eat during some of the year in the wild, as well as provide an adequate array of vitamins as well as proteins. One thing to consider when you're mixing your food is that watery food will provide your animal with less bang for your buck, or nutrients per serving in this case. Hydrating the powdered diets is definitely important, and too little water can make the diet grainy and unappealing to your gecko, which may negatively impact their feeding response. But making their diet too runny will reduce the amount of nutrients your animal is intaking. Additionally, variation in diet thickness will mimic various types of fruit flesh the animal will naturally eat, as ripe fruit is often soft and mushy and not so runny. I have found that my animals will grow slightly quicker on slightly thicker diets, and I've also found that my animals tend to have a better feeding response when I feed them these thicker diets. I tend to mix my diets to a ketchup-like consistency. Crested geckos are fun and easy pets, but being easy does not mean that they don't need proper care. My book, The Evolution of Crested Gecko Care, is now available on Amazon as a paperback and Kindle, immediately available after purchase. If you are getting your first crested gecko or plan to soon, this all-intensive care guide has all the modern and up-to-date information you will need for your crested gecko, from their history to their care and even breeding and common issues and solutions. Feel free to check out this book in the link down below in the description, and thank you so much for watching. As always, until next time.